Thank you so much, Professor Broberg. It is Thursday. It's the most beautiful day outside, and I'm glad we're able to be inside together for this presentation, the fourth and final presentation of our Seeking Justice in Arizona series. We have a very distinguished guest with us today that my colleague, Professor Provine, is going to introduce. But briefly, I just want to say, acknowledge that Professor Provine was the one who envisioned and who created the Seeking Justice in Arizona series 20 years ago. This is the 20th.
112.
This
I'm only 12 years old.
this is the 20th year. It's very a significant moment to mark 20 years of bringing in people across the state who are doing good works to make this place a better place for all of us, according to their vision of what justice means. And we've had students who've gotten internships. We've had students who've had new ideas about what jobs they want to take on. We've had students join movements because they hadn't heard of them before. So this is your opportunity to get to know some of our local royalty, so to speak. And so I just want to introduce Dr. Bree Provine, who was the chair, the director of the School of Justice Studies when we were. As you know, we're part of the School of Social Transformation now. And I'm just really, really pleased that you're able to join us on this anniversary of our 20th year of doing this work. So thank you, Bree.
From when I was in college, and I was a senior, and I asked the dean, I said, I don't know what I'm going to be able to do after graduation. I'm a public affairs major. They said, if you have to ask, you don't really belong here. You guys are getting to meet people who are in the world, and I'll tell you, this guy is busy enough. He's probably use half of you as unpaid.
Oh, yeah. We could pay a quarter of them, but everyone's yeah.
I'm introducing Ray Ybarra Maldonado, and he is so many things, but probably his full-time gig is being the founding partner and principal attorney of the Ybarra Maldonado. I know 19 attorneys since then. These folks represent people on the side of the individual against big things. They do criminal defense work. They represent people who have to fight with insurance companies, death actions, personal injury, that kind of thing, and civil rights. You know, these classic cases where it's David against Goliath. They're representing David and not Goliath. Their webpage is really stirring. I just want to put just a little bit of it to kind of give Ray a bit of an intro. This is what they write about themselves. Our story is rooted in the relentless pursuit of justice. We stand with communities fighting for the rights of those who need it most. Our commitment goes beyond the courtroom. We actively engage local organizations, social justice movements, and grassroots efforts. Uplift migrant. For us, it's not just about the law, it's about the people we serve. And I think you're going to see that in his. Ray is committed to immigration and migration. I should say migration and not immigration, because that's an important distinction he may talk about today. That's a fundamental human right, along with the Declaration of Human Rights. He's written books. He's produced films. He's trained immigration rights volunteers. He's worked in Tapachula, listening. Tapachula is at the very south end in Chiapas in Mexico, where immigrants are coming in from Guatemala, and they're often in kind of dire straits, and Mexico is not an easy place to transit. So he was there for, I think, at least a year on that. He lectures widely, not just here, but at universities around the country. His words are quoted. He's written 3 books, so they can actually go accurately. He was born here in Arizona, in Douglas. I think just a little south of the border. He was born here. He played baseball. I think that's really important.
Yes.
Someone in this room who played USCIS Community College. He had an athletic scholarship. He graduated summa cum laude in ASU in 2002, like some other people in this room are going to do. And then he went to Stanford Law School a few years later and graduated from there in 2007. He's worked for the United Farm Workers, the ACLU, organizations, the AFL-CIO, and he's been a public defender in Cochise County and in the Federal Public Defender's Office in Tucson. You know, still teach advocates at ASU Law School, which is good for them. They get some exposure to someone who's actually out there. I really appreciate about you. He's married to my doctor, Maldonado, whose last name he took, being Ybarra, so he's now Ybarra Maldonado. That's a nice compliment.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. It's like I'm tearing up from that introduction. Like, how am I crying already? Right? It's crazy. But yeah, the beautiful words that were on our webpage were written by my wife, Dr. Maldonado, who had her PhD from here at ASU as well. And it really is an honor and privilege to be able to come back to the university that has given us so much. And thank you so much for those that organized and put this effort on. I know it's been a long time coming. I appreciate the efforts and the energy. When I was asked to speak on November 14th, I said, when's the election again? Because we were asked, you know, a while back, right? Like last year sometime, I think it was. And I'm like, oh, is there any dates before that election? Because I really don't know what's going to be going on in the world after that. And sure enough, my life has been an absolute chaotic mess for the past week with the amount of fear and trepidation that's going through our community based on the recent election. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later on, the Prop 314 and then the Trump administration coming back into power again. But what I wanted to start with was to give a little bit of context first about myself and some of the cases that we've worked on. And what I'm really trying to do is to share a little bit about me. When I was at university, when I was in law school, really things that impacted me tremendously were guest speakers that came and told their story and shared where they've been and what they've done. And that inspired and motivated me to keep going on my journey and to get to where I'm at today. All right. So we get this clicker down right here. See if I can get it going.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like it is. We could do old school maybe. There we go. Look at this. We got it. So I like to show this map here, right? It shows my beautiful hometown of Douglas, Arizona. And it looks like we have beachfront property, right? You see a little ocean right there, right south of Douglas. It's not really the ocean, folks, right? It's another country. It's called Mexico. And yes, my mom was born on the other side of that border in Agua Prieta, Sonora. I was born in Douglas, Arizona. The hospital literally less than a mile from Mexico. Here's another better picture of it where you can see the different border towns, Douglas and Agua Prieta there, down from Brownsville over to San Diego. Here, focusing in a little bit more, you can see the border zone that we have here in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and that's going to become important in just a minute when I talk about some programs and operations that were launched by the federal government in the mid-90s that made us the peak of immigration here in the United States. And yes, I was an ASU grad, had to throw it back to my days protesting. We took over a couple of administrative buildings in my time here. I managed to survive and not get kicked out, thankfully, but just wanted a little shout out to my former ASU days here and the fights we've been doing. What is militarization of the border? What does that mean, right? Militarization of the border is essentially the concept that says governments are working to use military-like structures and resources to fortify an area to stop people from coming in. So here you have the example of the biggest one that we talk about all the time, the border wall, right? Here's a picture of the border wall outside Nogales. This little girl had just gotten off of her school bus and was walking home, and the two Border Patrol agents there patrolling the area. These are some cameras that are up there. When I lived in Douglas for between 2 years of law school, which I'll talk about in a minute, I would go for a run. I used to love to run out in the desert, and I'd get stopped because they would see me running out there on these cameras, and they would send a Border Patrol agent to come and ask me if I was a U.S. citizen or not. They have these also up there across the border area with agents in there looking out over. And then here's just a longer scope vision of the cameras and the towers along the border fence in Nogales. Military as well, like literal military. So as was mentioned earlier, I graduated from ASU, I went to law school at Stanford, and then I absolutely hated it. Right? Shocking. Who says that they go to an elite law school and they hated it? I do. I thought it was absolute horrific, that it was simply an institution designed to help rich people get richer, take rich people's money and preserve it, keep the status quo, and everything was geared towards business, large corporations, big law firms. And I was like, hey, I'm here to learn about social justice. I'm here to fight for immigrants' rights. I'm here to fight for workers' rights. Why is all this talk all the time about these big corporations and serving them? So I hated it so much that I took 2 years off from law school between my second and third year. I applied through the ACLU for what was called the Ira Glasser Racial Justice Fellowship. And I said, I want to go down to the border and I want to work on monitoring vigilante activity that's occurring in the town that I was born in and surrounding areas. Around that time, 2004, 2005, there was a movement growing of armed citizens moving to the border area to hunt for immigrants. I am not joking with you. Literally, not signing up for Border Patrol, not signing up for National Guard, on their own. I'm a white nationalist, white power. Let's go buy land in Cochise County and set up camps so we can go hunt for migrants from, right? So this was happening and not a lot of people were fighting back up on it. So I wrote my proposal, and I remember my interview at the ACLU, they flew me out to New York. So be it that the executive director at the time, and I believe he still is, Anthony Romero, was also a Stanford Law School graduate and also Latino, right? So all the other people there, like Kimberly Crenshaw, do you guys know Kimberly Crenshaw? She was one of the racial justice fellows that was picked. So it was like, I'm in this elite place and I'm like a 20-year-old, 22-year-old kid. And I'm like, oh, that's Kimberly Crenshaw right there. That's crazy. But anyway, so he tells me, okay, I'll give you this fellowship, but you have to promise to me that when you're done, you're going to go back to law school and get your degree. Because I don't want your mom yelling at me that you dropped out of law school. And I thought to myself, damn, this guy's on to me. He knows that I don't give a shit about being a lawyer, right? But I was like, okay, I'll do that. Let's go. So they gave me the fellowship for 2 years. I went down to the border. This operation here was in New Mexico because soon after these vigilantes started going down to the border, the movement kind of took off with something called the Minutemen Project. That's a good thing for y'all to Google, or if you ever have a paper to write on it or something, the Minuteman Project. So 2004, 2005, they announced that they're calling for all US citizens to come to the border to stop the invasion of immigrants coming into the country. So literally an open call for private citizens to come down in April 2005 to patrol the border. Guess where? In Douglas, right where I was living at. Just so happened to be right where I was at. My grandfather's house is on First Street, which if you think of the international border, that big fence right here, it's International, and then it's First Street, then Second Street and Third Street. So standing in my grandfather's backyard, I can literally throw a rock into Mexico. And I'm living here, and all these racists are saying we're coming from all over the country to your town to hunt for people that could be your relatives. So I said, nope, right? We're not going to sit by and do nothing whatsoever. At the time, still working for the ACLU, there was a lot of conflict and tension going on because the ACLU Arizona wasn't yet the immigrants' rights strong advocates that they are today. I remember going to board meetings and people saying, why are you helping immigrants? They're, going trespassing on these private citizens' property, and that's a violation of their civil liberties. How could you be doing that? I'm like, you guys gave me money to do this for 2 years. That's why I'm doing it. So nonetheless, we went ahead and called for volunteers, like they did, to come down to the border to do what? To follow these guys in the desert. So 5 a.m., 5 p.m., 3 in the morning, we're going to have people out there in the desert following these racist guys as they patrol and look for Mexicans. Crazy idea, right? Absolutely insane. I almost brought my kids to this presentation. I was like, no, I'm not talking about that. I don't think I want them to know about that. That's a little too crazy. And I remember getting calls from people that were big attorneys in the civil rights movement. You're like, no, you can't do that. That's way too dangerous. We got to think of tactics, lawsuits. Let's do a prayer vigil. Let's light some candles at the border. And I love candles, but I just didn't think the appropriate response to racists with machine guns was to light a candle and sit at the border, right? We had to go out there. We had to do something. We had to confront them. So we had hundreds of volunteers come down from all over the country, mainly principally in Arizona. And we did that for a month in April 2005. Then they went again in the next year to New Mexico. And I remember riding in the car, looking for the racist guys. And I see a tank on the side of the road. There's literally a military tank. Posse Comitatus Act, they cannot act as civil law enforcement, the military, but they can sit there in their tank, look at people, and then call Border Patrol and tell them where to go. And that's what these guys were doing out there back in 2006. Right, just some of the signs that you used to see out there back in those days. The creation of the border fence. You would think this was last year or 2 years ago. This was in 2008, right? Where before it was just barbed wire and 3 strings. And here you have the National Guard from Guam coming to Arizona and building the border. Unmanned aerial vehicles are also a big part now of the enforcement in the border zone. I have criminal defense cases now where it says, you know, the UAV spotted people coming across and the UAV trailed them. Like the amount of surveillance going on right now on the US-Mexico border is just absolutely insane. You think you're out there on your own. You think you have your privacy. The government is watching every move that people are making in the borderlands. This is what Trump wants to bring out, right? It's going to come out in 2 years. A little Skywalker here, Border Patrol. Just kidding. This is somebody made that. I don't see that happening. These things are way too tall. And there's going to be too much tariffs on steel to make them. So they probably won't go forward with that. Here we go back to the policy because we're at a school. So I have to talk about some educational stuff and not just tell stories, right? So what we had back in 1993, if anybody knows who was the president back then, a guy by the name of Bill Clinton, Democrat, right, decides, let me do this program called Hold the Line in El Paso. Why? Because immigrants were coming across through the fence in the city of El Paso, running through the streets, and people were getting mad. So the theory behind Operation Hold the Line is we're going to put Border Patrol agents shoulder to shoulder in the city area, and this will force them to not cross here and go to a more remote area where it's so deadly that they will never make an effort to cross. They'll just decide to go back home, right? They do the program, they call it a complete success. Number of apprehensions skyrockets down. People stop crossing in El Paso. They say, let's do it also in San Diego. The same thing's happening in the San Diego area. So Operation Gatekeeper gets launched in 1994. Same concept, let's put everybody on the line, make them cross in the desert. They'll be too afraid to do it. They'll just go home, right? What happened instead, 93 and 94, depends how you define success, right? But the Clinton administration says we are successful. All it does is push immigrants into the zones in between. And what's the zone in between? Arizona, right? So 95, 96, 97, and so on, Arizona is the epicenter for people crossing the US-Mexico border. And at this time, 98, 99, I'm living in Cochise County, back in Douglas, going to school at Cochise College playing baseball. Used to have to go from Douglas to Cochise College, which is a city, or college, I'm sorry, in the middle of the desert. If you've never been, it's worth going just to see, oh my gosh, there's a college in the middle of the desert and nothing around it, between 2 cities of Douglas and Bisbee. So I would drive out through the desert to the college. 5 a.m., have to be there for weightlifting, conditioning. And I remember being bundled up, gets cold out there in the desert, and just driving and seeing people on the side of the road in just t-shirts, right? Daily, I'm talking daily. We would go to games back up here in Mesa, Glendale Community College, whatever, drive back, be back in Douglas at 3, 4 a.m., and there'd be hundreds of people stopped by 2 Border Patrol agents. Come out to practice, there'd be people hiding in the dugout, like it was all over the place, right? And you would read about in the paper, another body found. People were dying trying to cross the US-Mexico border as a result of the policy. Let's close off the cities. Let's make them go through the deserts, walking for 2, 3, 4 days a week, sometimes longer, and losing their life in the middle of the desert. I thought to myself, one day I had a bad round of what's called batting practice. And I said, man, I'm not really going to be a professional baseball player. And it's kind of obvious now. I'll just go back to ASU, that beautiful school, and get a degree and then go on to law school and see what I can do to help out, right? So that's what I did. This is from that time. That people say that's me, I don't really believe it. My kids certainly don't believe it, but that was me back then, and that's the book, Born on the Border, that I wrote about that time back there. Shameless plug, available on Amazon and for free on the other one, so read it. It's an interesting time where I talk about the time on the border, following the vigilantes and coming across people and going into Mexico and finding people to bring lawsuits against these vigilante guys. right? So to go on, come back to undergrad, finish it up, go to law school, and then I'm here and return to Arizona with zero desire to be an attorney. I promised Anthony I was going to finish. I went back to law school, got my degree, came back to Arizona, and I'm back living on the border in Douglas and Arapieta, working at a migrant center, trying to do a national movement of mass civil disobedience and traveling around the country trying to organize that, right? Would come up to Phoenix whenever there was protests. This guy called Arpaio, maybe some of you guys have heard of him before. If not, he's a good historical figure to look up and learn a little bit more about. He was going crazy, so we'd come up, and one thing we would do would be to follow the sheriff's deputies, because what they would do is they would set up in Latino neighborhoods command centers. So they would take giant buses out there, they would take a lot of officers, and they would saturate the neighborhood. And they would say, let's go out, patrol the neighborhood. Anybody with a cracked windshield, anybody with broken tail light, pull them over. And then ask about their immigration status, right? Literally, this was happening, planned, coordinated projects that they would do. So kind of taking that idea from the border, we'd follow the sheriffs and then go behind them and then try to collect people's information and be part of a lawsuit later down the road, or, I mean, we just didn't really know what else to do, right? So remember one day we were out there and this guy gets pulled over. The sheriffs are talking to him and we're just yelling from it because you have to be far back. So we're yelling, in Spanish, don't sign anything, don't say anything. And just trying to yell that, trying to talk to the officers, trying to talk them out of arresting him, whatnot, just yelling, right? Then the attorney, the attorney for the community shows up, the most popular guy for the Latino community. And I'm like, oh, great. The lawyer's here. This is going to be awesome, right? He's going to go up there and he's going to tell him like it is. So the lawyer comes up, looks at the guy being arrested, looks at the cameras from Telemundo, and decides to go to the cameras for Telemundo. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? There's a guy right there, needs your help. Like, go over there and talk to him. And that was the impetus to where I finally said, all right, I'm going to be done not wanting to be a lawyer. Let me go ahead and take the bar exam. I graduated in 07. I didn't take the bar exam until like 2009 and come back to the community because clearly we need more people as lawyers, not just community organizers, though we do certainly need the former and the latter much more, and took the bar exam and sat for that, right? Fast forward now back to the Arpaio days, because he didn't stop with just the crime saturation patrols he was doing. It was eventually put to a halt with something called the Melendrez lawsuit. Anybody ever heard about that one? Another one to look up, another one to study, filed in federal court here in Arizona, which eventually said he was racially profiling people and he had to stop doing that, right? Led to a community advisory board, which Aaron, who's in the back, went to there last night. So it's still having repercussions for the sheriff's administration. So he said, okay, I'll back off from the crime saturation sweeps. So what does he do instead? He says, let me do raids of workforces. When they go to the workforces, big construction groups, landscaping companies, and we'll get the documentation. And if anybody used fake documents to work, we will put them in jail, give them a class 4 felony, got training by ICE on what charges to give them so that people would plead to a type of felony that would make relief in immigration absolutely impossible, right? So they do the raids. One of our very first cases was one of these Arpaio raid cases. Christine comes to my office in 2012 in absolute tears, bawling. Says that Miguel Angel, who's here with her in the picture, right, prior to the arrest, was working at one of these construction places, United Construction Group, arrested by Arpaio. He's sitting in his jail, charged with a class 4 felony. She's a US citizen. They have young kids. She doesn't want him to be deported. Now, the plea offer that county attorneys was giving at this time was to not much time in jail, 90 days, but to that felony where you couldn't do anything else. You're going to be deported for life, right? Criminal defense attorneys didn't know what to do with the cases because they're really like, if you presented fake documents to work, you're guilty of this class 4 felony, right? So I meet with Miguel Angel and I say, hey, what do you want to do? He says, well, I don't want to be deported for life. baby's here, my wife's here, like, I want to fight the case. I was like, well, I don't, how are we going to fight this case? Let's think about it. I remember going to community meetings and people making fun of us in the community meetings, like, why are you charging people to do those cases when they're indefensible? Like, just let the public defender do it because you're taking people's money who have no money, make 19, 20, 25,000 a year. We're asking for $5,000 from them to do a case at the end of the day we're going to lose anyways. I was like, well, let's see what we can do. And at that time, a couple of other attorneys were working to fight back against the cases, and they had an idea of why don't we say that this is preempted, a term called federal preemption, that Arpaio and the county cannot be doing these kinds of cases because it's strictly the domain of the federal government. I said, well, that's a very interesting argument. Like, let me see how we can make that happen. So I tell Miguel Angel about it. He says, yeah, go for it. File a motion to dismiss the case based on preemption, arguing that the state and county cannot have authority or jurisdiction to bring these kinds of cases based on the I-9 form and the wording in the I-9 form. Judge partially agrees with us and says, I kind of like your argument. I'm going to not let them bring in the documents that were attached to the I-9, but I'm going to let the case keep moving forward. And at that point, I'm like, okay, that's fine. We're trying to build a case for the Ninth Circuit so we can get a holding on it and stop these cases completely. Miguel Angel understands. We're probably going to go to trial. We're going to lose. You're probably going to get like 3 years in prison instead of the 90 days. But then we have a chance on appeal that you can eventually someday stay in the country. So we filed the lawsuit. We filed the paperwork. That gets ordered. We go to trial. The night before trial, I'm sitting in my office. I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to argue. I got no idea. And my wife, who always saves the day, and starts looking at the paperwork, and she's like, well, how do they know that he turned the documents in? I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good argument. Like, maybe that's something to roll with, right? So we go to the trial. Witnesses get called. One of the witnesses is his boss, the big boss, right? Big boss comes in, and big boss says, he calls him Andy. Andy, one of our best workers. Oh, he's such a good worker, man. He does the work of 5 people. He's amazing. And then the county attorney starts asking him questions, which you can't ask under the rules of evidence. But I was like, hey, it favors us. He's like, well, what happened to your business after the raid? He's like, well, my business completely went down. It destroyed my business. I couldn't afford to hire anybody. My house got foreclosed. Like, this is horror story of the Arpaio raid, how it affected him, the U.S. citizen. And then we asked him, okay, well, who was his supervisor? Oh, his supervisor was Joe Flo, right? Whatever. Oh, and where's he at? I don't know. He quit last week. He took off. Nobody knows where he's at. And I said, ooh, I got my boogeyman right here, right? Like, how do we know Joe Flo didn't turn these documents in and not my client? So we present that argument. We make that case. After a 4-day trial, it comes back with a not guilty verdict. Like, holy cow, we weren't even trying to win. We end up winning, right? So not guilty verdict, which means no criminal conviction. So no crimes of inadmissibility, no bar from ever legally immigrating to the country. He goes to immigration. He wins his case in this thing called cancellation of removal. If you can show extreme hardship to a U.S. citizen, child, or spouse, you've been living in the country for over 10 years and you're a good moral character, and he's now a legal permanent resident, right? Well, that's a victory story from the Arpaio days. Is he the exception or the rule? He's by far the exception, because there was hundreds of people who took that plea, who signed the 90 days, and they are deported for life. And when they come back, they're arrested and charged with illegal reentry after deportation, the #1 charged federal crime in the country. And they're given years in prison simply for coming back to the country to be with their family, to be with their children, right? We go on, 2012, that was a good case and that was fun. And then we just kept being there. Whenever the community called and asked for something, we would show up. You want to do a protest at the ICE building, 2013, right? This was like unheard of. It's so common now. Everybody will do it now. But in 2013, the thought of bringing and coming with undocumented people to the front of the ICE building was absolutely terrifying. Most organizations were like, no, you cannot do that, right? These organizations think they're the savior for the people. I think they're the voice for the people, and they're there to protect them, right? We said, no, if people are undocumented and they knowing what their risk is and they know what they want to get into, we're going to stand right next to them. So we would show up at these protests. I show up in my suit and just stand there. And the whole reason I'm there is just so that those people who are protesting feel like, hey, there's somebody here for me. right? There's someone that has my back. Do I know what I would do if they came out and arrested everybody? Probably not. But don't tell them that, right? I look good in my suit and I'm sitting there making them feel comfortable. So we go to these protests, we start doing those, and then it escalates a little bit more, right? This was one of the first civil disobedience campaigns in Phoenix for immigration, where these 4 brave individuals chained themselves to the ICE building and said, stop separating families, stop the deportations. Right? They were arrested, given federal charges, but we ended up getting like 10 hours of community service or something like that. But everybody was afraid because some of these folks were undocumented. And like, you're getting arrested in front of ICE and you're undocumented. You can't do that. And I said, why not? That's what they want to do. Like, I'm sure people told Rosa Parks, don't sit in the back of the bus, don't sit in the bus, right? Don't do that. You're going to get in trouble. The same thing here. We've had immigration activist police for so many years telling immigrants what they can and cannot do. And these are points where people are finally saying, no, I know the risk. I'm going to go forward. I'm going to do it. Ended up getting released that exact same day, a few hours later. So that was a very stressful but beautiful time, acting Congress to act. Later on, people sit in front of the buses that are transporting. This all happening like 2035 North Central, right? Not too far from here. The person in the middle, does anybody recognize her? That's her back, though. Anybody? She might have spoken to you last time. Reina Montoya, right? So Reina's right there in the middle, the very center. I'm sure she killed it when she was here and did an amazing job. And Operation Streamline is other things that we fought against. Another one to research how bad has the federal government targeted immigrants even before the Trump administration. Operation Streamline. This operation is based out of Tucson. And what they did was they would arrest people crossing that border, charge them with the crime of 8 USC 1325, illegally entering the country, 8 USC 1326, illegally re-entering after deportation, and they would take them to federal court. Now imagine a room twice the size of this with the same number of people that are in the room, but all the people in the room had just come from the desert, walking for 3 days, 4 days, 7 days, in the same clothes, burnt to a crisp, brought into federal court. They're brought into federal court in the morning. They sit here in these chairs. We as attorneys go up to them and get their story and tell them to plead guilty at 1:30 in the afternoon. Then they plead guilty, then they get sent to jail or deported after that. That was Operation Streamline. That was every single day. So these activists decided, we're going to figure out which buses take the people to the courthouse, and we're going to stop the bus with the car in front of it, then throw people under the tires and not let the bus get to the courthouse, to shut it down for at least 1 day. If you can't get the people there, they can't plead guilty, right? So they did that. There's a closer up picture of what they used to tie themselves up underneath the tires. And those people's cases for that day, were dismissed and they were not given criminal charges. Operation Streamline, interestingly enough, isn't happening anymore, thankfully. And I was a federal public defender for a time. What I wrote in my cover letter was, I want to stop Operation Streamline and any other program the federal government creates to criminalize immigrants. And I was there for 2 years and I didn't do a dent in it. We filed this, we filed that, Ninth Circuit this, Ninth Circuit that. We never made any inroads. And this, was a protest and it was good. It got media attention, didn't stop it. The only thing that stopped it was COVID, right? And once COVID happened, people were like, judges like, I don't want to get sick. Prosecutors, I'm not going to get in that courtroom with all those people. And since then, it hasn't been picked back up. They do a variant of it. You can still go to the federal court and see what they call flip-flops, but it's much different and not nearly as bad as it was back then. Some of the campaigns we've worked on before, these were 2 gentlemen who were deported during the Obama administration. Then we worked on bringing them back. Actually, that's first picture up top there is us walking in Nogales, going to the port of entry to present them and ask them to be let back into the country. And the picture at the bottom is, us walking into, me and Jaime walking into the CBP port of entry there in Nogales. Campaign goes on, right? Bring Jaime home, bring Ardani home. The family goes to DC, meets with Congress people, sits in front of the White House, goes on a fast, try to draw attention to let them back in and get them back together with their families. And this was under the Obama administration, right? And it'll all come together in a minute. You're like, what's this guy talking about? Why he's telling these stories? It'll be there, right? Fast forward now we're in the Trump administration. This was maybe y'all have heard of this case, Guadalupe Garcia de Rayos. They dubbed her as the first woman deported under the Trump administration. She was caught in one of those Arpaio raids back in the late 2000s. Since then, she'd been doing check-ins at ICE, which is every year she goes and says, I'm still here, I haven't committed any crimes. She was a mom, she had 2 kids. And then her first check-in was in late January, right after Trump was inaugurated. And she goes to her check-in and she doesn't come out. Right? Instead of coming home to her kids, they put her on a bus and they deport her. So it's dubbed internationally as the first person deported under Trump. We go on CNN, MSNBC, everywhere, talk about her case and talk about the attack of the Trump administration on immigrants and the fact that it's unfair and unjust that someone with 2 U.S. citizen kids and a life here who's been crime-free other than Arpaio conviction is deported without any opportunity to stay in the country. I guess I should finish this case up before I go to that one. So she's deported. She lives in Mexico for 4 years. Biden administration comes into power after that. We make a petition to have her brought back into the country. And about a couple of years ago, she came back, and now she's back with her family and her husband, despite the 3-4 years that she spent in Mexico. Right? Then Trump continues. He does what's called raids in Mississippi. And I remember I'd come out of the Eloy Detention Center, this nasty, ugly place that we have a couple hour and a half from here. And I see this article, not this article, another article about the ICE raid. And it says, Trump does largest ICE raid in the history of the United States of America. They went to all the chicken farms in Mississippi. They did exactly what Arpaio did and looked at the I-9s and documents and charged people with working with fake documents. And I said to myself, oh man, that sounds really familiar. And then I thought to myself, man, this is happening in Mississippi. Probably not a lot of Latinos in Mississippi. I went home, we talked with my wife about it, and I felt sick, like deathly sick. And I remember we just kind of said to each other, well, who's going to go first, right? Me or you? Nobody invited us. Nobody asked us, hey, can you come back over here or something? We were just like, hey, we did this under Arpaio. We defended worksite raid cases. We do immigration defense. We get people out of immigration detention centers. There's probably not a lot of Latino lawyers there. Let's go and see what we can do, right? So we fly over there and just say, all right, we're here. Give us some cases, we'll work them. One of the cases that we worked on was for a woman who was still breastfeeding. She was working, but still breastfeeding the 2-3-month baby at home. And we tried to say, hey, it's not fair to have her in a detention center when she should be at home with her child, with her baby. So we fought that case and eventually flew back to Louisiana, Mississippi multiple times. She was also removed from the country. We didn't win that one. Heartbreaking, right? To remember seeing the kids and the family and then seeing her, just devastating. I don't want to tell you that, oh, it's always sunshine and roses, right? Doing this work is a lot of crying, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of suffering. But there is times where if you persevere and keep going, then you can win again. So fast forward again, the Biden administration, same way we brought back Guadalupe, we were able to bring Lupita back. So Lupita is now back with her children in Mississippi and her husband. I remember I flew into Mexico to meet her and help her get back to the border. And she was a different person. She hadn't seen her kids for, I think it was a little bit less than Guadalupe, I think maybe 2.5 years. But like she was super depressed, couldn't talk. It was a completely different human being. Wouldn't visit her after we were able to get her out of the detention center, back with her kids, and she was back to life, from one day to the next after she was able to reunite with her family, right? This one, oh, that Black Lives Matter movement, right? So clearly injustices didn't stop when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening here or started here in Phoenix. Our law firm was the one that stepped up and said, yes, we will do whatever is necessary to be an ally and fight side by side with community members. We gave out our phone number for an arrest hotline, so 602-910-4040. People wrote it on their arms when they'd go out to the protest. And if they were arrested, we would have the phone lines open. Aaron, again, that's his picture right there with his legal observer shirt, and would be the one, along with my wife and others, answering the phones. We'd go to the initial appearances, represent people. At the time, they were doing this crazy thing of charging people with felonies of being gang-related by engaging in protests because they all had black clothing, right? So that we're going to charge these Black Lives Matter protesters as gang members. So I said, give me the heaviest felonies that we got. I'll take them on, and we'll do them pro bono, and let's fight this case. That prosecutor on that case, who I have multiple emails to saying, you need to drop these cases or drop them to misdemeanor court where they belong. These are not serious felonies, has since been disbarred, had her license taken away for what, not anything I did, but for the kind of actions she was taking on these kinds of cases. So we're able to help them hold her accountable. This one, I'm getting towards the end here, and I just have to bring it up. I have to bring it up. People at ASU might get mad at me. I'm sorry, but this is who I am. So there was a protest here, ASU, last year, right? Y'all hear about that? Yeah. Some of you were there, maybe. Don't admit to it, because I don't want you to get charged with any crimes. So they arrested folks. They arrested students for protesting on the lawn. So the same thing, we go out there, they call us our phone number, we go to the court hearing, and this is a picture after the first court hearing, which all of us smiling, right? Because the charges were not filed. The charges have been refiled. ASU, your university, ASU police, give to the county attorney and say, please bring charges against these students and others for camping on our lawn. Those are cases that we're fighting today, pro bono cases that we have today. I don't know how many we have, Aaron, like 8, 9, something like that, 9. Aaron went to the court the other day. So always fights, always battles, including against my beautiful alma mater, where I'm like, why? Well, I just want to praise you and be a Sun Devil and go to the basketball games and the football games, and you're arresting people, arresting students. But nonetheless, we keep cheering on the Sun Devils and hoping they do the right thing. All right. Bigger picture stuff. What does all this mean? This, one of my favorite speeches of all time, by Stokely Carmichael during the Civil Rights Movement at UC Berkeley. Right? I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do think it's important to get the gist of it here. Right? What he's talking about here is very relevant even today. Right? Now we want to take that to its logical extension so that we can understand that what its relevancy would be in terms of the new civil rights bills. I maintain that every civil rights bill in this country was passed for white people, not for black people. For example, I am black. I know that. I also know that while I'm black, I'm a human being, and therefore I have the right to go to any public place. White people didn't know that. Every time I tried to go into a place, they stopped me. So some boys had to write a bill to tell the white man, he's a human being, don't stop him. That bill is for the white man, not for me. I knew it all the time. Right? Same exact thing, folks. A lot of the work I did before attorney was just talking to immigrants in Tapachula, in Agua Prieta, at migrant centers, saying, why are you doing this? Immigrants know that they have a fundamental human right to cross borders. So just like Stokely says, I don't think immigrants need immigration reform. White people need immigration reform. To tell them, leave them alone. They're doing what they're allowed to do. Walking, migrating, moving. Reread the Declaration of Independence. See why the colonizers were so mad at the King of England. White people, people of privilege, not just white, as we see the numbers of Latino men who voted for Trump, right? All people of privilege need immigration reform so they can be told it's okay what they're doing. They're seeking a better life for themselves. Just leave them alone. You focus on your life. You get your life better. You get in better shape. You eat healthier food. You figure out a way to have a happier life and stop just demonizing people because you don't understand them, because you don't know them, because they are engaging in what's fundamentally their right as a human being born on earth, which is to move wherever they want to move. Right? The cases that I talked about that I wanted, when I was trying to envision, and what did I want to talk about, what I want to say today, and I don't know if y'all are feeling this way, maybe you're not, but all of my circle, everybody that I know, everybody I talk to is unbelievably depressed, is extremely anxious, is afraid. I've talked to so many people in the last week, US citizens included, who are like, I'm afraid of being denaturalized and deported myself. I'm afraid of Operation Wetback coming back. I'm afraid of the Bisbee deportations coming back. And they're going to, as promised, do mass deportations on day number 1. I wanted to show those cases to remind y'all, to remind myself, that even though dark times are coming, victories can come out of dark times. There's no need to think that we're just being set up to be slaughtered. That the next 4 years, we're just going to sit back and say, okay, do whatever you want to me. We lost. We're going to fight back. Just like we fought back against the Arpaio raids, just like we fought back against the family separations. I didn't even talk about family separations, right? We fought back against those. My wife got an award from Zuckerberg for her work in reuniting the children with their parents. In the work that we did against the Trump administration the first time around, we will win a lot of these cases. It will be bad. I'm not going to lie to you and say, oh, don't worry about it, don't stress, No, it's going to be bad. They're going to come up with some really horrible stuff, worse than they did last time, because they've had 4 more years to think, what are we going to do? And they control the Congress and they control the Senate. So it's going to be a rough 4 years. What we have to do is to remind ourselves, remind our families that we've been through horrible things before, and we will come out the other end. Right? So we're ready. I'm ready for January now. Like, let's just go. Like, it's going to happen. Let's get it started. Right? Been there, done that. We're ready to fight back. Let's go win some cases, and let's throw that wrench in the system for as long as we can. Hope the judiciary has our back, like they did during the first administration, shooting down the Muslim ban and the family separations, and run to the courts when we have to and try to stall things out for as long as we can, so that we can get through the next 4 years, while organizing, of course, for the years after that. I'm not some Democratic spokesman. I'm not here for the Democratic Party. I'm not running for office. We've been fighting, and I'm tired from the last 4 years of fighting under Biden. Walking here today, and one of my trains was coming in from Eloy and Florence, people that Biden are trying to deport. Tell me about their cases. It doesn't stop because of Democrats in office. That's not the end goal. But nonetheless, we got to get through these next 4 years. So I think I talked longer than I was supposed to. I'm sorry, I didn't want to leave a lot of time for comments, but once I get rolling, I just don't shut up. But if you want to get a hold of me in the future on social media, we're at Abogado Ray. My email is ray@abogadoray. I don't have any cards. I forgot to bring cards with me, so just follow us on social media. But I do, you want to take some time, any questions, comments, concerns y'all have while we still have the time.
If you have questions, you can raise your hand. I'll come over to you and pass the mic on.
Hi. Well, thank you for coming in and speaking with us today. And I'd like to say congratulations on all the cases that you've won. I have a question about like I know you've taken on like a bunch of different cases, but what is like the normal process for this case to go to like to trial or to court?
Yeah, so we do different practice areas, right? So we do criminal, we do immigration, and we do personal injury. So for example, one person on our team right now is going to a hospital because someone was shot by police a few days ago. So we're seeing if it's a case that we can take and bring a lawsuit against the city for shooting that person. Somebody else is going to a detention center, talking with that person, seeing whether or not there's a way we can stop the deportation and get them home. This morning, I went with one of our criminal attorneys to a hearing. Someone's license was getting suspended, and it was his first hearing, so I went with him, and we got the license stopped from being suspended, right? So every case and every day can be completely different. Minor victories like this morning of not getting someone's license suspended, major victories like last Friday when we had a overturning of a negative finding of reasonable fear for somebody from the immigration judge, and that person will now not get deported. So it's different every single day, but that's why I love it too, right? Like there's so many amazing things that we can do in the criminal side in terms of we know the immigration consequences. So we can tell the person, if you plead to that, you're going to be deported. If you plead to this, you have a chance. If I say this word in the factual basis, you might be able to stay in the country, whereas if I don't, you'll be deported. And the immigration side, getting people status, you get married to a U.S. citizen, U visas, right? It's just being able to give somebody something positive. If it's a car accident case, here's $30,000 check for the pain and suffering you went through from the insurance company. You know, it's just varies day by day, but that's why I love coming to work every day. Yes.
Well, aware of actions against ASU for what they did at the rally last fall. For example, some people were arrested and ASU expelled them, took away their scholarships, and told them then later they had to write statements apologizing
Right.
to ASU. And then there's a concern now whether those statements will be discoverable as the county attorney pursues the criminal charges. Are there any actions?
There are, yeah. So we're on the criminal side, so we're defending the criminal case. There's a separate civil lawsuit being filed or has been filed in federal district court where they're a little bit more advanced on that. So there's a chance that the result of that, we can get something good in the criminal side. But yeah, that's already happening. And the repercussions have been beyond that too. It's like fingerprint clearance cards for folks were taken away just for simple of the fact that they were arrested, and getting those back have been difficult. So it remains a fight 100% on both the civil and the criminal side.
And ASU rewrote their free speech guidelines, I understand, and I know the social transformation, correct me if I'm wrong, and asked for a administrative staff person to come and explain to the school the implications of the new law, and they declined to even come and explain it.
Yeah, I mean, it just, when they dropped the case, they didn't bring the charges. I thought this is the right thing to do. It's not going to come back. And then they decided to bring it back. Like, I think they put the chief of police. Yeah, I think so. Somebody else's hand up.
There.
Over here. Yes, sorry.
About one of the things you mentioned earlier about people going through El Paso. I know that like in Juarez, there was a lot of like cartel or gang movement, and that's a lot of the reason why people fled there. Was that taken into consideration at all from a legal standpoint, that a lot of those people were coming for asylum because the violence there was so bad?
Yeah, so I don't know if you can hear, but I'll repeat the question. So the question's about the cartels, and people are coming across the border in El Paso, in other words, other places because of the violence happening from the cartels, which honestly, like for the past 4 years, that's been our #1 source of people coming across the border from Mexico, have been saying that. And it's not just Juarez anymore. Now it's literally all over the entire country, where these gangs who used to focus on international trafficking of drugs, people smuggling, they've now adapted a little bit to the more difficulties of making money that way. And what they're doing is that they're going after their own community. And again, I just have to tell the truth of what I've been hearing, but they, instead of going after selling drugs or moving people, they're saying to business owners, workers, you need to give us money for our protection or we're going to hurt you. And they are hurting them, right? So they're coming across asking for asylum in very high numbers. Now, to win asylum in the United States of America, you have to prove that that fear of persecution or your past persecution is related to a valid reason within the asylum laws. And general fear of violence or of cartel violence is not a valid reason. Religion, political opinion, particular social group, we can get creative, and our attorneys are great, Zach and Vanessa, making these creative arguments about how, no, this is a particular social group, even though it appears to be a general gang violence one. But yeah, they are taking into consideration, but only for the fact of denying people. So they're saying, we don't care how bad it is in Mexico. It doesn't fit within our realm of asylum, so we're going to kick you out of the country anyways. Right. Yes.
Hi. So thank you again for coming. And it's like all of the work that you do is super admirable. I wanted to ask, there's so much fear that really contributes to like the racial and political division that we're seeing nowadays. And I wanted to know how you think that your work contributes to sort of eliminating that fear and creating more unity between different racial and political groups.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really do see, like, especially this point in time, our job right now as people that have been through the fire and that have experienced it before is to try to calm some of that fear, right? So it's also almost like right now we're kind of in this social services mode where we're just trying to disseminate information. So if you go on our TikTok or our Instagram, that's where it's at, right? There's the videos of me saying, hey, this is what Proposition 311 is. Let me explain to you why, what's really going to happen, and trying to calm those nerves. And the only fear and paranoia I have right now is I'm not putting out enough. I'm like, I should be in front of a camera or my phone right now talking more about something else to try to ease people's fears, because I do believe that the fear and anxiety, and it's hard for me to say this, but I believe it, that the fear and anxiety that we are placing on ourselves is doing as much harm as the administration will actually do, right? But it's not just us on ourselves, because the day after the election, one of our workers, one of our team members got into a Lyft or an Uber, and the driver was wearing a Trump hat and tells her, how do you think he's going to start the mass deportations? And we don't like you people here, literally. The day after, right? So these aggressions, microaggressions, the rhetoric within the community, within schools, that is real, and that's something that is horrific from the election. But then on top of that, our own anxiety of, he said day one mass deportations. My mom, my dad, my uncles, my cousins, my girlfriend, he's going to come on day one, right? But then you have to tell people, like, hey, your fear is valid, your terror is valid. I'm not trying to take that away at all, but let's walk through this, right? He's already been president once. You think he didn't want to do mass deportations the first time? You think he didn't try to deport everybody he could the first time? You think he tried to stop all Muslims from coming to the country the first time? He did, and we fought back, and we survived. We made it through. You're still here, right? And then we have these victories, and we try to talk about some of these, like, hey, let me tell you some things we did in our pilot. Let me tell you some things we did under Trump, to try to ease those concerns a little bit, realizing, though, there are going to be people that are going to be deported and worse off and imprisoned, despite the fact that we fight back hard. Yes.
Right, we talked about our pile and Trump, but are there any local law enforcement or any other kind of people at that front line level in which you've actually had a positive experience with? I know, for example, law enforcement in El Paso was not enthusiastic about deportation. Have you run into that as well?
We have. Yeah, there's some local. I was happy to read today the city of Phoenix talking about our law enforcement, our police will not be used to assist in the immigration deportation raids. That's huge. A local officers, and I'm never going to say anything pro cop. You will never hear me say that. But seeing the mayor come out and city council come out and say, no, you're not going to use our office for this, that's a big deal, right? The county sheriff, we have a new one in town who worked under Arpaio. So my fear is he comes back with some of those old tactics that Arpaio used. And we also have in Cochise County a pretty far right sheriff. But as far as Pima County Sheriff, local Phoenix Police, the two bigger jurisdictions, I think we have some allies there where I'm not worried about all the government entities being on the same page as Trump is.
Ray, we have a question from one of our online viewers. First, she says, thank you for your presentation. She asked a question in order to make a difference, she's reconsidering law school. And she asked, do you think a master's in legal studies or a traditional law school track is the way to go in order to really kind of make a difference in today's kind of climate?
Yeah, I think either one would be amazing. I still remember thinking back to my last days at ASU where I wanted to go to law school and my advisor was just like, do not go to law school. You will hate it. You will hate being a lawyer. Get a PhD. Right, get a PhD and study and write and research and advocate and be an organizer. And I said, no, I'm gonna go to law school. Right, so I made that track. He was completely right, absolutely 100%. Professor Ken Morrison, completely right. I hated law school. I hate the establishment of being a lawyer. I hate being part of a cog in the system of criminalization, of the over-incarceration of people, of deporting people, right? We profit off of that, just as private prisons do. I hate that. Makes me feel nasty. But when we're able to help people and we're able to get those victories, it feels amazing, right? So being an organizer, working on big issue policy stuff, I still think that's tremendously important. And I don't think it's really which one will you have more impact. I think you have to just ask yourself, which one makes me happier every day? When I wake up in the morning, which one do I get more excited to do? Working in organizing, working directly with communities, working on policy issues, or going into a courtroom and advocating on behalf of somebody. And whichever one you feel, you're also not tied to. Like I could decide right now to stop being a lawyer and go back and do organizing, or I can go get a job at the law school as a professor, right? So you can change who you are throughout your life. It's one thing I didn't understand when I was in college. I thought I had one track and that's all that I had to be.
We have time for one more question. Oh,
You've written, what, 3 books?
Still have time, yeah. Every now and then I have time to write, time to lecture, time to make movies, time to make documentaries. It's just, I love to create. Our family loves to create. So, you know, you're not tied into being a traditional anything.
I think we've got time. One more question? Yes.
Kudos to all the work you're doing, the energy you keep up to keep moving forward. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Hope we can all embrace that from you. I'm curious if anyone's talked to you about trying to seek asylum outside of the United States because of vulnerability due to US law.
Yes. Yeah, recently, this week, right? It's a brand new question for me, but literally people have to pay to talk to me for a consult. It's horrible. My mom gets so mad at me. Like, what do you mean? We charge 100, we charge $250 now. Talk to me for half an hour. That's crazy, right? I'm worth at least 1,000, I promise you. But nonetheless, like my mom gets mad at me. You charge people $250 to talk to you? Like, yes. This week, people paid me to ask me that question. I'm like, people are that afraid of being denaturalized and deported, mass deportation, that they're literally saying like, hey, can you help me get citizenship in France, get citizenship in Italy, do something like that. So it's just, I mean, there's context to everything. And I think those people's concerns are valid because they're, you know, different parts of the country. People are like, hey, we need to deport this person. So it's very real and very true. So it's sad to say, but yes, people are talking about it. People are thinking about it. People are planning it. And to me, it's just like, I understand where that's coming from. But my response to them is like, let's stay here and fight. If it gets to the point where I think you have to do that, I'll advise you of that. But in the meantime, let's fight. You know, just because they get you in their hands doesn't mean you're gone the next day. We can file lawsuits, habeases, stop removal. You know, let's keep going.
Everyone let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.